The Philippines isn't facing one typhoon. It's facing something meteorologists have never seen before. Two super typhoons, 5 days apart. While rescue teams were still pulling bodies from the wreckage of Typhoon Kalmaegi, satellites detected something horrifying approaching from the Pacific. Typhoon Fung-wong, a storm so massive its diameter could swallow the entire archipelago. 1 million people began evacuating, while 377,000 others remained displaced from the storm that had just passed. Emergency shelters designed for 2,000 people suddenly housed 8,000. Medical supplies depleted during the first disaster weren't available for the second. This isn't just weather. This is a preview of what climate chaos looks like when nature stops following the rules. And what happened next would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about tropical storm formation. November 6, 2025, 3:47 a.m. Philippine Standard Time. The Philippine National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council declared a national state of calamity. Typhoon Kalmaegi had just finished carving through the Visayas region, leaving 294 dead, 526 injured, and 109 people missing. Search and rescue teams were working around the clock, pulling survivors from collapsed buildings and flooded communities. In the provincial capital of Cebu, where Kalmaegi's landfall had been most devastating, Emergency Coordinator Lieutenant Colonel Maria Santos was overseeing rescue operations when her satellite phone buzzed with an urgent message from Pagasa headquarters in Quezon City. A new storm system was rapidly intensifying in the Western Pacific. Dr. Ramon Cruz, chief meteorologist at the Philippine Atmospheric, Geophysical and Astronomical Services Administration, had been tracking the disturbance for just 18 hours. What he saw on his screens defied conventional meteorological wisdom. Within 72 hours, what started as a tropical depression exploded into Typhoon Fung-wong, packing maximum sustained winds of 185 kilometers per hour. The storm's central pressure had plummeted to 943 millibars. Its eye wall was tightening into a perfect circle, just 25 kilometers across. And its trajectory pointed directly at northern Luzon. We had never seen anything like it, Dr. Cruz would later tell reporters. Kalmaegi should have disrupted the atmospheric conditions. There should have been wind shear. There should have been cooler ocean temperatures. Instead, the Pacific was acting like a storm factory. For the first time in recorded Philippine meteorological history, the archipelago would face 2 consecutive super typhoons within a single week. Emergency coordinators who were already stretched thin from Kalmaegi suddenly found themselves preparing for an even larger evacuation. Evacuation centers that housed 302,008 displaced people would need to accommodate hundreds of thousands more. The logistics were staggering. Aurora Province alone needed to evacuate 127,000 residents to facilities designed for 15,000. Military transport helicopters were still delivering relief supplies to Kalmaegi-affected areas when they received orders to begin Fung-wong evacuations. Coast Guard vessels damaged during Kalmaegi's storm surge couldn't be deployed for water rescues. The Philippine Red Cross issued an urgent statement. "We are not just responding to one disaster, we are managing 2 simultaneous catastrophes with resources designed for one." But that statement would prove optimistic, because what they were really facing was something meteorological science had no playbook for. Provincial Governor Elena Rodriguez described the situation as trying to perform surgery while the patient is still being shot. The Philippines was attempting disaster recovery while simultaneously preparing for an even larger disaster. Medical personnel treating Kalmaegi's injured were redeployed to prepare evacuation centers for Fung-wong. Emergency supplies reserved for Kalmaegi recovery were diverted to Fung-wong preparation. But this unprecedented storm pattern was just the beginning of what satellites would reveal about our changing climate. The western Pacific Ocean had become a furnace. Sea surface temperatures reached 29.5 degrees Celsius, nearly 3 degrees above normal for early November. This superheated water mass stretched across 2,000 kilometers of open ocean, providing unlimited fuel for storm development. Satellite thermal imaging showed ocean heat content at the highest levels recorded since modern measurement began. Typhoon Kalmaegi should have disrupted the atmospheric conditions needed for another major storm. When typhoons pass through warm ocean waters, they typically leave behind cooler temperatures and atmospheric instability that prevents immediate storm formation. It's nature's way of spacing out these massive weather events, a meteorological cooling-off period that can last weeks. But satellite data from NOAA's Goes West weather satellite revealed something unprecedented. The ocean's thermal layers had stratified so intensely that Kalmaegi barely affected the deeper warm currents. Ocean temperatures at depths of 50 to 100 meters, the critical zone for typhoon energy extraction, remained at near record highs. Within 48 hours of Kalmaegi's passage, sea surface temperatures had returned to their pre-storm levels. The atmospheric pressure patterns that normally prevent rapid storm succession had collapsed across a corridor stretching from the Marshall Islands to the South China Sea. Dr. Maria Santos from the Philippine Atmospheric Research Institute called it a meteorological perfect storm creating multiple perfect storms. The jet stream, the high-altitude river of air that typically guides storm systems and creates wind shear, had stalled in an unprecedented configuration. Wind shear, the atmospheric force that typically tears developing typhoons apart, had disappeared across a 1,500-kilometer corridor. The Madden-Julian Oscillation, a planet-scale weather pattern that influences tropical storm development, was locked in its most active phase. Normally, this oscillation cycles through active and inactive periods over 30 to 60 days. But climate scientists observed that warming ocean temperatures were keeping the oscillation locked in storm-favorable conditions for extended periods. Fung-wong didn't just form quickly. It exploded with what meteorologists call rapid intensification, gaining more than 55 kilometers per hour of wind speed within 24 hours. Satellite imagery captured the storm's eye contracting from 80 kilometers to just 25 kilometers in 6 hours. Its diameter expanded to 1,800 kilometers, large enough to cover the entire Philippines simultaneously. The storm's internal structure defied conventional models. Hurricane Hunter aircraft from the U.S. Air Force 53rd Weather Reconnaissance Squadron measured pressure gradients so steep that wind speeds increased by 70 kilometers per hour over just 15 kilometers of distance. The storm's eye wall contained updrafts reaching 18,000 meters into the atmosphere, higher than commercial aircraft fly. Dr. James Mitchell, a tropical cyclone specialist at Colorado State University, described Fung-wong as a storm that behaves like it's on steroids. Computer models designed to predict typhoon behavior consistently underestimated the storm's intensity. Traditional forecasting tools, calibrated using decades of historical data, couldn't account for the unprecedented ocean and atmospheric conditions. Yet this meteorological phenomenon echoed a terrifying pattern from the Philippines' deadliest storm in history, with one crucial difference. November 8, 2013, Typhoon Haiyan approached the Philippines with the same quiet intensity that would later characterize Fung-wong. Residents of Tacloban City watched the ocean retreat from shore, an ominous sign oceanographers call storm surge drawback. Children played on newly exposed seabed, collecting shells and starfish while adults prepared for what they expected to be another routine typhoon. At 4:40 a.m. local time, Haiyan made landfall with sustained winds of 315 kilometers per hour. The storm surge that followed reached 7.5 meters high, equivalent to a two-story building of water moving inland at 40 kilometers per hour. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath walls of seawater carrying cars, trees, and debris from destroyed buildings. Survivors described the sound of Haiyan's winds as freight trains screaming through a tunnel that never ends. Trees centuries old snapped like matchsticks. Concrete buildings designed to withstand earthquakes crumbled under sustained winds that exceeded the design specifications of modern construction. Bodies were found 15 kilometers inland, carried by surge waters that penetrated far beyond any previous storm's reach. In Tacloban alone, more than 2,000 people died in a single morning. The final death toll reached 6,300 across the archipelago. Economic damage exceeded $2.8 billion, more than some Pacific Island nations' entire gross domestic product. But Haiyan was a single event. Recovery teams had weeks to prepare. International aid had time to mobilize. The airport in Tacloban, though damaged, could be cleared within days to receive relief flights. Evacuation centers could be rebuilt before the next typhoon season. Supply chains could recover. Medical personnel could rest and regroup. The Kalmaegi Fung-wong sequence offers no such luxury. In Cebu, where Kalmaegi killed 43 people just days earlier, emergency shelters designed for 2,000 evacuees suddenly needed to accommodate 8,000. Hospital beds occupied by Kalmaegi's injured couldn't be cleared for Fung-wong's casualties. Medical supplies depleted during Kalmaegi response weren't available for Fung-wong preparation. Rosa Delgado, a 67-year-old resident of Bohol who survived Kalmaegi's flooding, found herself evacuating again just 5 days later. "We lost our roof to the first storm," she told aid workers. "We lost our walls to the flooding. Now they want us to leave again, but we have nowhere left to go." Her story echoed across the central Philippines. Families who had lost everything to Kalmaegi were told to prepare for an even stronger storm. Evacuation centers that provided temporary shelter after the first typhoon became staging areas for the second evacuation. Emergency food supplies distributed after Kalmaegi were packed again for Fung-wong evacuees. The psychological toll proved as devastating as the physical damage. Dr. Patricia Mercado, a trauma counselor deployed to affected areas, described disaster fatigue setting in among survivors. "People had just begun processing the trauma of the first storm," she explained. "Now they're forced to relive that terror while still dealing with the aftermath." Children showed signs of acute stress. Adults who had spent days searching for missing relatives were told to focus on preparing for the next storm. Community leaders who had organized Kalmaegi recovery efforts found themselves organizing new evacuations while their communities remained in ruins. And now, with Fung-wong's landfall confirmed, scientists fear this double impact scenario is becoming the new reality across the Pacific. November 9th, 2025, 2110 Philippine Standard Time. Typhoon Fung-wong made landfall in Dinalungan, Aurora Province, with maximum sustained winds of 185 kilometers per hour and gusts reaching 230 kilometers per hour. The storm's eye wall, by 25 kilometers of absolute calm, surrounded by the most violent winds on Earth, passed directly over communities still repairing damage from Kalmaegi's passage 5 days earlier. 1 million people had evacuated northern Luzon in less than 48 hours. It ranks among the largest peacetime evacuations in Philippine history, comparable to the displacement of entire cities during World War II. Emergency coordinators moved entire barangays, some containing 10,000 residents, to higher ground using military transport trucks, helicopters, and improvised civilian convoys. The scale was unprecedented. Aurora Province's 14 municipalities implemented a total evacuation order for all coastal areas and low-lying communities. Residents loaded precious belongings onto jeepneys, tricycles, and carabao-drawn carts in scenes reminiscent of wartime refugee movements. Military personnel went door-to-door in remote areas, physically carrying elderly and disabled residents to evacuation vehicles. But the evacuations revealed devastating gaps in disaster preparedness. Aurora Province's official evacuation centers could accommodate 15,000 people. They received 127,000. Families slept in school hallways, government buildings, basketball courts, and parking garages. Social distancing became impossible. Medical personnel warned of potential disease outbreaks within 72 hours. Isabela Province faced similar overcrowding. The provincial capital building became a shelter for 3,000 people, despite being designed as office space. Municipal gymnasiums housed families in conditions aid workers compared to refugee camps. Portable toilets couldn't be delivered quickly enough to maintain sanitary conditions. Power grids across northern Luzon went dark as Fung-wong's outer bands reached shore. The Luzon grid, which supplies electricity to 75% of the Philippines' population, automatically shut down sections serving 12 provinces as wind speeds exceeded safety thresholds. Internet infrastructure failed. Cell towers toppled under sustained winds exceeding their design specifications. For 8 hours, the outside world lost all communication with approximately 3 million people in the storm's direct path. Satellite phones became the only communication link between emergency coordinators and national headquarters. International news crews lost contact with their Manila bureaus. Satellite imagery captured Fung-wong's storm surge reaching 4.2 meters along Aurora's coastline, higher than most single-story buildings. Coastal communities that survived Kalmaegi's flooding now faced complete submersion. The town of Casiguran, population 25,000, reported surge waters reaching the second floor of the municipal building. Search and rescue teams, already exhausted from 5 days of continuous operations, watched helplessly as their primary staging areas disappeared beneath surge waters. Coast Guard vessels positioned for water rescues were forced to evacuate to deeper waters as harbors became too dangerous to navigate. The storm's massive size created another unprecedented threat. Fung-wong's hurricane-force winds extended 400 kilometers from its center, meaning areas that typically shelter evacuees from coastal storms were experiencing typhoon conditions themselves. Baguio City, usually a safe refuge in the mountains, recorded wind gusts of 140 kilometers per hour. Emergency services reported complete system failure across the storm's path. The provincial hospital in Aurora declared a black status emergency, meaning they could not accept new patients due to structural damage and power failure. Military medical units deployed helicopter ambulances to evacuate critical patients to Manila, but flights were suspended when wind conditions exceeded safe operational limits. Communication blackouts prevented damage assessment for critical infrastructure. The Dinalungan Bridge, a key evacuation route, couldn't be inspected during the storm's passage. Highway networks remained impassable due to fallen trees, flooding, and debris. Railway services connecting northern Luzon to Manila suspended operations indefinitely, because what happens next could determine whether the Philippines can survive what climate scientists now call the new normal. As Fung-wong moves toward Taiwan, weakening but still dangerous, meteorologists are studying something more troubling than the storm itself. The ocean conditions that created this double typhoon scenario haven't changed. Sea surface temperatures remain 3 degrees above normal across a region larger than the continental United States. The jet stream patterns that allowed both storms to intensify remain locked in place. Atmospheric pressure readings suggest the Pacific is primed for additional rapid cyclogenesis events. Dr. Chen Wei-ming from the Taiwan Typhoon Research Center warns that we may be witnessing the emergence of a new storm pattern that could fundamentally alter how we prepare for tropical cyclones. Climate models suggest that warming ocean temperatures could make back-to-back super typhoons not just possible, but routine across the western Pacific basin. The implications are staggering. The Philippines faces an average of 20 typhoons annually under normal conditions. If even half of those begin clustering into rapid succession patterns, the archipelago's disaster response capacity would collapse entirely. Recovery periods that currently last months would be measured in days. Economic systems dependent on agriculture cannot survive consecutive crop destruction events without triggering food security crises. International climate scientists studying the event have reached contradictory conclusions. Dr. Sarah Williams from the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School suggests the double typhoon pattern represents natural variation within normal Pacific weather cycles. We've seen similar clustering events in historical records, she argues. The difference now is our improved ability to monitor and measure these storms. But Dr. Kenji Nakamura from Japan's Meteorological Research Institute disagrees. His analysis of Pacific Ocean heat content data spanning 40 years shows unprecedented thermal energy accumulation. The ocean has crossed a threshold, he states. We're seeing energy levels that can sustain multiple simultaneous storm systems without the normal recovery periods. The data remains insufficient for definitive answers. Climate attribution science, the field that determines whether specific weather events result from human-caused climate change, requires years of analysis. But real-time impacts don't wait for scientific consensus. What's certain is that the Philippines' current infrastructure cannot withstand repeated super typhoon impacts without recovery intervals. Evacuation centers built for single storms cannot accommodate back-to-back evacuations. Hospital systems treating one disaster's casualties cannot simultaneously prepare for the next disaster's victims. Agricultural systems cannot survive consecutive planting season destructions without triggering rural economic collapse. The 377,000 people displaced by Kalmaegi face an uncertain future, many lost homes, livelihoods, and community connections. Recovery assistance programs designed for single-event disasters cannot address cascading impacts. Insurance systems calibrated for historical storm patterns may prove inadequate for new clustering realities. The 1 million people evacuated for Fung-wong confront similar uncertainty. Some evacuation centers have housed the same families for both storms. Children have missed weeks of school. Small businesses have lost inventory and customers. Tourism-dependent communities face extended recovery periods as visitors avoid regions perceived as perpetually storm-threatened. Provincial governments are already adapting their disaster preparedness strategies. Aurora Province is designing permanent evacuation facilities rather than temporary shelters. Bohol Province is implementing building codes that assume multiple annual typhoon impacts rather than single seasonal events. But individual adaptation efforts cannot address systemic challenges. The Philippine economy loses an estimated $2 billion annually to typhoon damage under normal conditions. If storm clustering becomes routine, economic losses could exceed the government's disaster response budget within a single storm season. Regional cooperation mechanisms face similar strain. ASEAN disaster response protocols assume member countries can provide mutual assistance during single-country emergencies. If multiple countries face simultaneous storm impacts, traditional aid-sharing systems could break down. Meteorologists continue watching the Pacific Ocean, where conditions remain perfect for the next unprecedented storm formation. Long-range forecasts suggest the atmospheric patterns that enabled Kalmaegi and Fung-wong will persist through the remainder of the 2025 typhoon season. The Western Pacific sea surface temperature anomaly shows no signs of returning to historical norms. The question isn't whether another double typhoon event will occur. The question is whether the Philippines and other Pacific Island nations will be ready when it does. Because if the past week taught us anything, it's that our old assumptions about how nature behaves no longer apply. And somewhere in the Pacific, warmer waters continue feeding the next storm system that could rewrite everything we thought we knew about survival in the age of climate chaos.